We have come to the part of our conference where we have our party leader and Prime Minister, the Right Honorable Freundel, Stuart, address us. At this point in time, I want to ask that you stand, please, as we welcome to the auditorium to address the 60th Annual Conference of the Democratic Labour Party, the Right Honorable Freundel Stuart and Party Leader. Our second Vice President, Senator Freundel will formally introduce our Party Leader. The door opened and it closed back. I'm not sure what caused that. Members, here comes Right Honorable Freundel Stuart as he takes his seat. We can do better than that. Come on, come on. Please. Before I sit, I want to acknowledge Senator Irene Sanford Garner and Comber, the Minister of Health, John Boyce, Honorable John Boyce, and I see James Paul, who's also just arrived, a member of Parliament. I think I called all the names of the guys, okay? And ladies, not girls, ladies, and ladies. I now want to formally invite Senator Verla de Pisa to the stage to introduce our party leader. Verla? I've never had a chance to kiss Verla, so I'm going to kiss her now.
Please be seated. Members of the Diplomatic Corps, members of Cabinet, members of Parliament generally, specially invited guests, and of course, our dear loving people, the comrades of the Democratic Labour Party. Good morning and welcome. My task is an easy one. The gentleman that I am to introduce to you is no stranger to you. His roots are from St. Philip. But the people of St. Michael's South are his adopted family. He has been a hard-working member of this party for decades. This is not to date him, but simply to speak to his commitment to this party and seeing it go forward. I believe hard work always has a reward. It may not be the moment that you expect, but it always has a reward. And his ascendancy to the Prime Ministership of Barbados took none of us by surprise. We did not like the manner in which he first became Prime Minister, but certainly having achieved his own mandate, we are satisfied that he is the right man for these times. And that not only we here in this auditorium believe so, but that the people of Barbados stand behind him. So ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, because I do know that I am not the person you wish to see, I will invite our President, the Prime Minister of Barbados, to address you, to address those in the diaspora following on our live stream, and to address the people of Barbados. Ladies and gentlemen, our Prime Minister.
Madam Chairman, members of the Cabinet of Barbados, members of Parliament, members of the Diplomatic Corps, members of the Executive and General Councils of the Democratic Labour Party, delegates to this 60th Annual Conference of the Democratic Labour Party, comrades and friends, ladies and gentlemen. I feel honored to be able to address you today on this, the second and final day of the 60th Annual Conference of our great party. We have behind us the reports of both our Executive and General Councils, the Women's League and the Young Democrats. We have received reports from our overseas branches, and we have debated some of the resolutions down for discussion on our conference agenda. We have been doing DLP business in the DLP way. I should like to welcome all of you here today. Proof, were any needed, that you have continued to keep faith with the party which has done more to transform Barbados than any other party in our country's history. In the face of the multiple challenges with which we have had to deal as a party in government, your steps have not faltered, your faith has not weakened, and your resolve has remained always strong. Thank you very much for your unwavering confidence. Since our annual conference in 2014, a number of stalwarts who have contributed much to the life and progress of the Democratic Labour Party have been gathered unto their fathers. I speak of the 22 names identified at page 84 of your conference document. Now, to those 22 must now be added the names of Vere Brown of St. Philip South and Rita Goodrich of St. Michael West, both of whom passed from this life after the conference document went to print. Omitted from the list in your document is the name of Carol Fields QC of St. Philip South, who rendered invaluable service to the party going back as far as 1956, when he was its candidate in the parish of St. Philip, along with the late Winter Algernon Crawford. To single out any of those mentioned in the conference document for special mention would be invidious, all of them in their own unique ways having contributed to the vigor and vitality of the party. In any event, they all received appropriate tribute and recognition from the party during their lifetime, and in many cases, in death at their funeral services. We remember them with a special fondness and with abiding gratitude. May light perpetual shine on them all. And may I ask you to stand just to observe a minute's silence in their memory. May they all rest in peace. Thank you very much. This party has been in office now for the past 7 challenging years. We assumed responsibility for this country's affairs in January 2008, the Western world having gone into a deep recession in the last quarter of 2007. Our main trading partners, the United States of America, where it all began, the United Kingdom and Canada, all felt the effects of this veritable economic earthquake. Only in January 2015 was the leader of the free world, the President of the United States of America, able to stand up, look the world in the face, and announce that the recession was finally over in that country. The inevitable drag flowing from the most challenging downturn since the Great Depression is still being felt with varying degrees of intensity across the world. Amongst the BRICS countries, that is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, the economic news has for some time now not been good. India is perhaps the only exception at present. The Eurozone continues to struggle, with countries like Greece, Spain, France, and Italy still facing acute problems of debt, deficit, and anemic growth. Two of our main trading partners, the United Kingdom and the United Kingdom and Canada, continue to experience the economic stress that has been the unavoidable consequence of the events of 2008-2009. You may say that you have heard this before from me and from others, but it bears repeating as a lesson in history and in political reality. After all, the truth loses none of its freshness in constant repetition. We here in Barbados have had to accustom ourselves to the disingenuous claims of some publicists that the global downturn had nothing to do with Barbados, that all of the economic and other problems of Barbados were essentially homegrown and had to be laid at the feet of the government. In 1991, the then Prime Minister, the Right Honorable Erskine Sandiford, had to battle with the same kinds of attacks, but without the true world situation and its impact on Barbados being available to the general public. Thankfully, the high cell phone penetration, internet access, and the ready availability of global news in 2015 have brought reliable sources of information within easy reach of the general public and made cynical manipulation of people's emotions more difficult to achieve. Indeed, as I indicated in January of this year, in an address which I did to the Barbados Chamber of Commerce and Industry, the World Trade Organization, membership of which Barbados subscribed to in the year 1994, in a report issued in December 2014, took a completely different view to that being pursued by our local detractors. Here is that organization's portrait of Barbados. I quote, "Barbados is a small and open economy located in the Caribbean. Barbados has a population of approximately 278,000 and a GDP per capita of around $13,600 US. The relatively small size and island location makes the country highly dependent on imports. Merchandise imports accounted for approximately 40% of GDP in 2013, while the share of merchandise exports was around 18% of GDP. Barbados has a narrow economic base, with the tourism sector and related activities responsible for over 50% of economic activity, and government and financial services account for most of the rest. The lack of diversification, high dependence on imports, and a high level of debt leave Barbados extremely vulnerable to exogenous shocks. As such, the global financial crisis in 2008 seriously affected Barbados," unquote. The government of the Democratic Labour Party, confronted with the twin challenges of debt and deficit, has been managing a fiscal consolidation program which it introduced in August 2013 for a period of 19 months in the first instance, but which it extended for another fiscal year to secure the program's positive results from the threat of easy erosion. This program required the stimulation of our revenues and the disciplined management of our expenditures. Without healthy revenues, the government would not be able to meet its obligations to the public in the areas of health, education, road repairs, welfare, wages and salaries, or national security. No one individual or group's taxes can meet that individual or group's needs in any of these areas. Taxes are a collective national effort for the collective national benefit. Of course, it goes without saying that governments have a duty, when taxes are paid, to spend those taxes wisely. That the government of Barbados has been careful to do over the last 7 years. The program has been working as we have seen our fiscal deficit slashed in half and our foreign reserve situation stabilized. Its success so far is a tribute to the trust, the understanding, and the support of the public of Barbados. In that regard, I extend the deep gratitude of the government of Barbados to members of the Barbadian public. It has taken both courage and conviction to preside over the fiscal consolidation program in place in Barbados since August 2013. Balancing the need to administer urgent fiscal corrections against that of not imposing unbearable burdens on the people of Barbados was really a tough call. The choices were not easy, but in the end, I think we acted in the best interests of the country. The public face of this program has been the Minister of Finance, the Honorable Christopher Sinclair, who I was often publicly urged since becoming Prime Minister to fire. Indeed, in some cases, deadlines were set for me to do so. I have always been conscious of the fact that Chris Sinclair is not the Secretary of the United States Treasury, or the British Chancellor of the Exchequer, or the Minister of Finance of Canada. He's the Minister of Finance of the Barbados described in the WTO report I referenced earlier. He cannot cause problems for the persons just identified, but they, by their execution of the policies and decisions of their countries, can cause problems for him. I have therefore frowned on the repeated calls for his removal from some rather predictable but unhallowed quarters. This conference last Sunday adopted a resolution congratulating the Minister of Finance on his performance. I want today to place on record my own personal thanks to Minister Sinclair for the calm, the courage, and the conviction which he has brought to the discharge of his responsibilities during one of the most difficult periods in the economic history of Barbados. He continues to do his country proud. No less reviled has been the minister presiding over the sector which must lead and has been leading Barbados's recovery. I speak of the Minister of Tourism and International Transport, the Honorable Richard Seeley. Counting not the personal cost, heeding not the wound, seeking not for rest, and asking only for the reward of seeing Barbados return to the path of economic prosperity, Minister Seeley has, with exemplary calm and strength of character, been nursing the tourism sector to ever higher levels of performance. In so doing, of course, he continues to place all who wish Barbados well in his debt. My highlighting of the work of these two ministers in particular is merely contextual. The performance of any Minister of Finance in any part of the world is ultimately dependent on the performance of the individual sectors. When Ministers of Finance report, they do so in part based on how sectors for which they have no direct daily responsibility have been performing. The ability of the Minister of Finance of Barbados to present a positive report card to the population depends to a large extent on how creatively and courageously Dr. David Estwick deals with the issues around sugar and non-sugar agriculture and the stubborn water resource and water management challenges. How Minister Don Villinis faces down the plethora of challenges with which the international business and financial services sector has bristled. How Minister John Boyce superintends the issues related to health and health care with a view to keeping alive the link between a healthy nation and a wealthy nation. How Minister Ronald Jones preserves and promotes the culture of education for self-assuredness and self-reliance, using the tools of science, technology, and innovation. How Minister Michael Lashley manages our infrastructure and the public transport system to stimulate and encourage the generation of economic activity and to facilitate productivity. How Minister Stephen Lashley mobilizes the energies of our youth through the creative use of culture and sports. How Minister Dennis Kelman responds to the exigencies of low and middle-income housing solutions in Barbados. How Minister Dennis Lowe responds to the challenge of creating an environmentally sound Barbados. How Minister Stephen Blackett performs his role of using the concepts of social care and community development to realize the goal of creating a Barbados that is socially balanced. How adeptly the transforming initiatives in the energy sector are handled by Minister Darcy Boyce. How our human resource endowment nationally is harnessed and developed by Minister Dr. Esther Bayer, and how we use our relations with other states and organizations, pulling all of those domestic issues together to maximize benefits to Barbados through the untiring efforts of Minister Maxine McLean. All of this is undergirded daily by the imperative to have a society in which law and order prevail. And responsibility for this rests securely with the Attorney General and Minister of Home Affairs, the Honorable Adriel Brathwaite. I wish to thank these all, along with Minister of State in my office, Senator the Honorable Patrick Todd, Parliamentary Secretaries Irene Sandiford Garner, Harcourt Husbands, and Jepta Ince, and all of our other members who set such a high standard in the House of Assembly and in the Senate for the courageous and committed efforts they have been making on behalf of our beloved Barbados during a very unique and difficult period of our economic history. Now, as if having to deal with the economic challenges has not been enough, there has been surfacing recently in Barbados a problem of grave concern, not only to the government, but also to the population as a whole. I speak of the problem of the virtual explosion of the use of illegal firearms among scattered segments of our youth. The pain and anxiety experienced in some of our households and in our communities by the increasing incidence of this problem has been indescribable. Let me begin by saying that the problem is not new. In the year 1998, with the economy growing and performing well, a new Firearms Act was passed precisely to deal with this unsettling phenomenon. Stiff penalties were provided, and the Bail Act, which was passed later, made it mandatory for bail for firearms offenses to be granted only by a judge of the High Court if a person was charged with an indictable offense under the Firearms Act. But the fact that the problem is not new does not make it any more palatable or excusable. Barbados does not manufacture the firearms now in far too familiar use in this country. These firearms are coming generally out of the United States of America, a country which has lost control of its own firearms problem, as weekly news items coming from that great and powerful country would seem to suggest. In the year 1992, it was Governor Mario Cuomo of New York who, in describing the state of rootlessness among youth in certain areas of the United States, said that the young men and women there were more familiar with the sound of gunfire than they were with the sound of an orchestra. President Obama said only in the week which has just passed words to the effect that inability to subdue the gun problem in the United States was one of the disappointments with which he will be leaving the presidency. Now, firearms do not fly. Firearms do not swim. They're conveyed by human agency. They're either, like the sargassum seaweed, travel by sea, or like African dust, travel by air. There are people who send them to Barbados, and there are persons who receive them in Barbados. There are people, too, who bring them into Barbados. There are people who sell them, people who give them away, and in some cases, people who rent them out to some of our young men and our young women. They therefore get into Barbados either by the inadvertence or by the condonation or complicity of human agents. Whether by inadvertence or condonation or complicity, they're causing untold pain and anxiety in our households and in our communities. Against that background, I should like to make the most civil call to all concerned to exercise the greatest care, the greatest vigilance, and the greatest sensitivity on the issue of firearms being sneaked into Barbados illegally. At the same time, let me say that the government cannot afford to be, and does not intend to be, a helpless spectator bound hand and foot while the wanton use of firearms by a still mercifully small segment of our young men tears our homes and our communities apart. Let us be clear here. We are not dealing primarily with a downstream issue. The failures have been occurring upstream, and what we are witnessing is the result of those failures. Upstream are to be found the families and the homes, the local communities, the schools, many of which, in terms of the inculcation of those values that made Barbados strong in the past, are much weaker centers of influence than they were at the time of our independence. In far too many cases, the means by which we have been living in this society have been continuing to outpace and outdistance the ends for which we should be living in a society. The steady and systematic commercialization of life in Barbados over the last 40 years helps to explain this change of emphasis from ends to means. Material possessions are always desirable, always important, and always necessary. But a too materialistic culture can beget its own serious problems. It can profit Barbados nothing if we gain the whole world, but in the process lose our nation's soul. If our families and homes, our schools, our communities, our churches fail upstream, we can with reasonable accuracy predict what we'll be up against downstream. Children do not run societies, adults do. Parents, teachers, political and religious leaders must take back control upstream if we are going to arrest the present slide. When the police are asked to get involved, the damage has already been done and the failure has already taken root. Fortunately for Barbados, we do still have a constructive and purposeful youth population in the main. Our youth are for the most part doing positive things and making productive use of the opportunities available to them. We are speaking today of those scattered segments of our youth population which have not been touched deeply enough by our massive investment in education or by the human values that have made Barbados the great nation that it is. This is a cohort of the population to which we must all reach out with a view to seeing how best we can, within reason and within existing constraints, minister to their needs and to their requirements. Interventions by the state, however well-meaning, are no substitute for responsible fathers and responsible mothers, responsible grandfathers and responsible grandmothers, responsible aunts and responsible uncles and other family members. No substitute for strong, courageous, and authoritative teachers who command the respect of their students. No substitute for those religious, particularly Christian values, and those moral values taught by our churches, which should be reinforced in our homes and in our schools. And no substitute for sensitive, supportive, and sympathetic communities. In that connection, I will let the late Dr. Martin Luther King say an important word on this issue. I quote, "We are faced with the fact that tomorrow is today. We are confronted with the fierce urgency of now. In this unfolding conundrum of life and history, there is such a thing as being too late. Procrastination is still the thief of time. life often leaves us standing bare, naked, and dejected with a lost opportunity. The tide in the affairs of men does not remain at the flood. It ebbs. We may cry out desperately for time to pause in her passage, but time is deaf to every plea and rushes on. Over the bleached bones and jumbled residue of numerous civilizations are written the pathetic words, "Too late," unquote. Let us therefore stop the puerile blame game and all act before it is too late. We all have a role to play in defending our families and communities from the erosion of values that results in the kind of wanton behavior that threatens all that we've worked so hard to create over the years. Political parties and their members, too, have their part to play, since they are made up of parents and grandparents, aunts, uncles, teachers, and youth leaders, among others. The government, for its part, will continue to use all of the resources at its disposal to restore that state of normalcy to which Barbadians are accustomed and to which Barbadians are entitled. Now, next year, Barbados completes 50 years of independence, for which the Democratic Labour Party fought a fierce battle locally between 1965 and 1966. We have, over the last 50 years, been able to remove many of the social and economic contradictions which we inherited from our colonial past. This party's policies made no small contribution to that historic achievement. I expect, therefore, that as the party that fought for independence, we will make our presence felt in the 50th anniversary celebrations. Independence is not any longer a partisan political issue. It belongs to all of us as a nation, but the DLP can and must make its presence felt. The party, locally, and all of our overseas branches must be mobilized around the attainment of this historic milestone. In the meanwhile, the party in government continues by its policies to pursue the vision of creating a Barbados that is socially balanced, economically viable, environmentally sound, and characterized by good governance. In that pursuit, we continue to rely on the support of every member of the party and all right-thinking members of the public. This is our Barbados, and we must spare no effort in ensuring that we explore and exploit to the full its capacity to be the greatest nation on earth. Yes, we've been having our challenges, which we share with other nations, but these challenges are temporary. We must never mistake what is just a moment in time for eternity. There are great and positive things happening in Barbados, even while we triumph over our present difficulties. As the poet Arthur Clough reminds us, not by eastern windows only, when daylight comes in the light. In front, the sun climbs how slowly, but westward look, the land is bright. Let each of us determine, each in his or her own way, to make our land even brighter, 60 years after the formation of our party, and particularly as we enter our 50th year of independence. Now, before I conclude, let me recognize our sister CARICOM country, Dominica, which is now in the throes of the devastation caused by a traumatic national disaster. I have been, in my capacity as Prime Minister of Barbados, but also in my capacity as Chairman of CARICOM, I've been in touch with the Prime